was halfway through my second year at university when I found out my brother had disappeared. There had been no calls, no messages. He was just gone. At first, I figured it was just him being dramatic again. He did that sometimes, disappearing for a day or two to punish someone for some perceived slight. Things like Mum not getting him what he wanted for his birthday, or Dad not wiring money on time, or even me not replying fast enough. He was like that. He always wanted to make sure you noticed his absence. But this time, it felt different. There was a hollowness to the silence that made my skin prickle. I remember sitting on my unmade bed in my dingy student flat, scrolling through his social media profiles over and over, as if refreshing them enough times might summon a new post. He hadn't posted anything for 48 hours. There was nothing on Instagram, no tweets, no group chat activity. It sounds stupid now, but that's what made my stomach twist into knots. Oliver loved being seen. He needed an audience like some people need oxygen. Silence wasn't just out of character. It was unnatural. I tried calling him, my fingers trembling slightly as I pressed his number, straight to voicemail. His cheerful, recorded voice jarred against the growing dread in my chest. Still, I didn't panic. Not then. I forced myself to breathe evenly, pressing my palms against my thighs to steady myself. I figured maybe he'd dropped his phone. Maybe he was partying. Maybe he was with some girl and didn't want to be bothered. It wouldn't have been the first time. He thrived on drama, but not mystery. He liked people watching, not wondering. Then I got a message from one of his friends, Will. It was only a short one. He asked if I'd heard from him, said he hadn't shown up to a thing they had planned, which again, doesn't sound like much, except Oliver hated cancelling plans. He hated looking flaky. He was almost allergic to being unreliable. He had this whole image built around being the guy who always turned up, even if it was late, even if he made a scene. He showed up. My mouth went dry as I read Will's message. Once, twice, 3 times. As if the words might rearrange themselves into something less worrying. I called Mum. The sound of her voice, tired and slightly irritated at being disturbed so late, made me realize how tightly I'd been holding myself together. She said she hadn't spoken to him either. Not in 2 days. I could hear the concern creeping into her voice as our conversation continued, matching the cold sensation spreading through my veins. That was when the feeling really started. The low, creeping anxiety in the gut. The mental flicker between he's probably fine and this isn't normal. I remember walking around the kitchen, just holding my phone, unlocking and relocking it, like the right notification would suddenly pop up and explain everything. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, making my headache worse as I paced the linoleum floor, counting the cracks to keep myself from panicking. I didn't know where he was. I didn't know what had happened. And at that point, I didn't even suspect what the truth was. It would be weeks before I found out about Marcus and Dominic. We weren't friends, not really. They were just 2 guys from my old 6th form, a year above me. We'd nodded at each other in the corridors, but that was about the extent of it. Just enough familiarity to pretend we knew each other if we passed on the street. But they knew my brother. They really knew him. He made their lives hell in school. It wasn't just standard bully stuff either. I mean, it was targeted, deliberate humiliation. One time he posted a photo of Marcus changing in PE, edited it, and stuck it all over a forum. Another time, he locked Dominic in a cleaner's cupboard for almost 2 hours during lunch. He had a talent for making people feel small, and he enjoyed it. The memory of Oliver's laughter as he recounted some of these stories over family dinners made me sick now. How had I never seen the cruelty for what it was? I always knew he was cruel. I just didn't realize how far it went. He was never like that with me. Not directly. We were brothers after all. But I'd seen glimpses. The way he'd talk about people when they weren't around. The way he'd smile when he got under someone's skin. A cold, satisfied smile that never quite reached his eyes. Anyway, Marcus and Dominic had stayed friends after school. Flat shared somewhere cheap on the outskirts of town. They were into all the usual grim internet stuff. Gore sites, urban legends, conspiracy boards. Always trying to one-up each other with shock value. Half of it was probably just to try and cure the boredom, and the other half of it was probably leftover anger they never fully unpacked. I imagined them hunched over a laptop in a dark room, the glow of the screen illuminating their eager faces as they delved deeper into the digital underworld. From what I eventually learned, they started dabbling in the dark web that year. Nothing too serious at first, just poking around out of boredom. Marcus was studying computer science and knew how to get through the layers relatively safely. Dominic was the one who pushed for the more extreme stuff. He was the kind that always had something to prove. I think he wanted to feel powerful in spaces where he didn't have to look anyone in the eye. Perhaps he thought the anonymity would fill the void left by years of humiliation. At first, it was just the usual black market nonsense. Fake passports, mystery boxes, weed from Canada. They spent hours trawling through scam sites and abandoned forums, just laughing at how dramatic it all looked. But after a while, it got stale. They said it all felt fake, like a haunted house with the lights on. Nothing really scared them anymore. I can almost see them, bored and restless, seeking something more, something real to make them feel alive. That's when they found the site. I know how it sounds. A site for hiring hitmen. It's like something out of a B-movie. But they swore it looked real. It was plain, clinical. There was no music, no red font. Just a drop-down menu of options and a price chart. It was boring, which somehow made it worse. Like someone wasn't trying to scare you. They were offering a service. Like ordering takeaway or booking a plumber. The banality of it must have been chilling. There was even a customer service email. Dominic tested it, asked a fake question about pricing in euros. Got a reply within the hour. Professional, courteous, terrifying in its normality. That should have been the point where they backed off, or at least shut the laptop and walked away. But they didn't, because they were drunk and bored and still angry. The alcohol flowing through their veins, loosening their inhibitions, allowing old wounds to fester and burst. They picked my brother. I honestly don't know how seriously they meant it. I don't know if they thought it was all a joke. But they filled out the form, put in his name, attached a photo they found on Facebook, and typed out his last known address. I imagine them giggling nervously, egging each other on, neither wanting to be the one to back down. Then they click submit. No payment was made. No confirmation email came through. The site vanished a few hours later, disappearing as if it had never existed in the first place. They figured it was a prank, that the site was just harvesting data, or maybe it was a social experiment. Whatever they thought, they went to bed laughing and had probably forgotten all about it by morning, nursing hangovers and ordering greasy takeaway to settle their stomachs. 2 days later, my brother disappeared. The first video arrived a week after that. Marcus got the email first. It was from an unknown address. There was no subject, just a video file attached. I imagine him opening it casually, perhaps expecting spam or a meme from a friend. He told Nathan, my housemate, what he saw. I only got the details secondhand at first, but eventually I got my own copy. The notification pinged on my phone during a lecture. I stepped outside to watch it, not knowing my life was about to fracture into before and after. It started with static, then a camera adjusting and someone coming into focus. It was my brother. He was tied to a chair, hands bound, head slumped forward. The room was dimly lit, with concrete walls bleeding dampness. Oliver's usually perfect hair was matted with sweat. His designer clothes rumpled and dirty. The video was 10 minutes long. Most of it was just people standing around him, faceless figures in dark clothing. One of them leaned in and whispered something. My brother flinched. A visceral, full-body reaction that made me flinch too, alone in the empty university corridor. At the 8-minute mark, they hit him. The sound of flesh meeting flesh made me gag. Then the screen cut to black. A few seconds later, text appeared. Payment pending. 48 hours. Then we escalate. The words burned themselves into my retinas. White text on black background. Simple. Direct. Horrifying. Marcus and Dominic freaked out, immediately calling each other. They argued, blaming each other. I think part of them still thought it was fake. That it was some elaborate scam, a deepfake maybe, some revenge prank. They couldn't imagine they'd actually set something in motion. That's the thing about people like them. They play with fire and act surprised when something burns. Their panic would have been almost comical if it weren't so tragic. Two boys suddenly realizing they weren't men after all. But the next video came anyway. This time, there was no doubt. He was still alive, still in the chair, but he was bleeding. His lip was swollen, split down the middle like an overripe fruit. One of his fingers looked broken, bent at an angle that made my stomach churn. They made him say his name. He said he was sorry, that he didn't understand what was happening. His voice cracked on the last word, a thread of confusion and terror that unraveled something inside me. I'd never heard my confident, arrogant brother sound so small. The final screen read, 24 hours. The countdown ticked in my head like a bomb. I could almost hear it, drowning out the sound of students in the distance, completely oblivious to how my world was imploding. I don't know why Marcus sent it to me. Maybe guilt. Maybe he thought I could help. Maybe he wanted someone else to carry it with him. When I confronted him, his face was ashen, dark circles under his eyes like bruises. He looked haunted. He said he had no money and that Dominic wouldn't answer his calls. He said the email replies were getting angrier, each message more terse, more threatening. He showed me his phone, hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it steady. Not long after that, they both vanished. First Dominic. He just stopped showing up to work. His phone was always off. His socials were wiped. Marcus filed a report, his voice trembling as he described his friend to the disinterested police officer taking notes. I stood beside him, feeling like I was watching everything through thick glass. Then, shortly after, Marcus went quiet. The last thing he sent me was the text. There was no explanation, just, "I'm so sorry." Those 3 words echoed in my head for days. I tried calling, messaging. I even went to their flat. I found the door ajar, and when I went in, the rooms were all completely empty, as if they'd vanished into thin air. No one has seen either of them since. My brother never turned up either. There was one final email, sent to me. It was from the same unknown address Marcus told me about. There was no subject, no message, no even a video this time. There was just a still frame. An empty chair. Blood on the floor and Oliver's designer shirt, torn and bloodied, draped across the arm of the chair. That was it. I stared at the image for hours, memorizing every detail. The concrete floor, the spatter pattern, the way the chair was positioned slightly askew, as if someone had just vacated it. The longer I looked, the more I felt myself disappearing too, dissolving into the horror of that image. The police couldn't do anything. No one believed the emails were real. There was no trace of the website, no digital footprint. It was like it never existed. The detective assigned to the case gave me pitying looks, as if I'd made it all up. I wished I had. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if Marcus and Dominic never found that site in the first place, or if I had just paid, if they'd taken it seriously, or if they'd backed out before pressing submit, if Oliver had been kinder, if. The possibilities branch out like cracks in ice, each one leading to a different outcome. Maybe one where my brother comes home. Maybe one where I can sleep through the night without seeing him, sat there vulnerable and scared. But mostly, I just think about the chair and how empty it looked at the end. I used to think of myself as a digital explorer, not a hacker. I never had the skills for that, but someone who enjoyed poking around the dustier corners of the internet, finding weird forums, abandoned websites, obscure file-sharing networks. It was a hobby, something to do during those long, sleepless nights when my anxiety wouldn't let me rest. I never thought it would lead me to what I found last winter, or that I'd still be looking over my shoulder nearly a year later. I've tried talking to a therapist about this, but I always stop short of sharing the full story. How do you tell someone you've glimpsed something so fundamentally wrong that it's changed how you see the world? So I'm writing it down instead, maybe as a warning, maybe just to finally get it out of my head. I work in IT, network administration for a mid-sized company in Sheffield. Nothing exciting, just making sure systems stay up and running, troubleshooting when Karen from accounting can't connect to the printer for the 10th time that week. I'd been with the company for about 3 years when this happened, comfortable enough in my role that my mind often wandered during the quieter moments. I'd always been interested in computers. Built my first desktop at 15 from parts I'd saved up for over 6 months. Taught myself basic coding from library books because my parents couldn't afford internet at home yet. That early fascination with technology never really left me, even as it became my career. My flat has a small second bedroom that I'd converted into a home office. Really just a desk crammed against the window with my old desktop computer and a couple of monitors. Not the sleekest setup, but it was mine, and it was where I spent most of my evenings. The desk was littered with the usual debris of someone who spends too much time at a computer. Empty coffee mugs with rings of dried caffeine at the bottom. Scraps of paper with scribbled IP addresses and notes. A stress ball shaped like a server that a colleague had given me as a joke gift. The walls were a dingy off-white that I'd been meaning to repaint since moving in 3 years earlier. It was a Tuesday evening in November. I remember because I'd been putting off doing my online grocery shop, which I usually did on Mondays, and the reminder had popped up on my phone twice already. Outside, the wind was howling. One of those proper northern gales that make the windows rattle in their frames. My heating had been playing up again, so I was sitting at my desk wearing 2 jumpers and a pair of thick socks, occasionally rubbing my hands together between typing. I'd been exploring the dark web on and off for a couple of years by then. Nothing serious, mostly just curiosity about whether it lived up to its reputation. I'd set up all the proper security measures: Tor browser, VPN, the works. Most of what I'd found was disappointingly mundane. Drug marketplaces that looked like badly designed eBay pages from 2005. Forums discussing privacy and cryptocurrency. The occasional repository of pirated software. Nothing like the horror stories you hear, which I'd mostly written off as urban legends exaggerated by people who'd never actually been there. That night, I was following a trail of links from a forum discussing privacy tools. One link led to another, then another. You know how it goes when you're mindlessly browsing. My coffee had gone cold, forgotten on the desk, as I clicked through increasingly obscure websites. The lamp on my desk was the only light in the room, casting long shadows across the walls. My eyes were starting to sting from staring at the screen too long, but I was in that zone where you keep going despite knowing you should probably call it a night. I ended up on what appeared to be a classified site, similar layout to Gumtree or Craigslist, but with a minimalist design that was typical of dark web pages. The categories seemed standard at first: electronics, vehicles, services, property. But there was one category that stood out: merchandise. Something about the clinical term made me pause, my cursor hovering over the link. I remember taking a sip of my cold coffee and grimacing at the taste. It had that bitter, almost metallic flavor that coffee gets when it's been sitting out too long. I clicked on merchandise, expecting to find counterfeit goods or drugs arranged by category. The page loaded slowly, another typical dark web experience, and when it finally appeared, it took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. The listings were organized by location, with major cities and regions from around the world as headers. Underneath each location were dozens of entries with brief descriptions and prices listed in Bitcoin. I scrolled down to the UK section, more out of curiosity about my own country than anything else. There were subsections for London, Manchester, Birmingham, and, to my surprise, Sheffield, my city. My stomach tightened as I clicked on it, though I couldn't have explained why I felt uneasy. The Sheffield section contained about 20 listings, each with a similar format: a reference number, an age, a brief physical description, and a price. No names, no photos, just entries like SHF 2241 19 brunette athletic build, followed by a Bitcoin amount. It took me embarrassingly long to realize what I was looking at. I'd like to blame it on being tired or the bizarre clinical nature of the listings, but I think part of me was deliberately refusing to connect the dots. When understanding finally hit, it was like a physical blow. These weren't items, they were people, human beings categorized like products, listed for sale in my city. I remember pushing back from my desk so violently that my chair hit the wall behind me. My hands were shaking, and I felt suddenly cold in a way that had nothing to do with my faulty heating. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of sick roleplay site, or an elaborate scam targeting gullible people with dark fantasies. Because the alternative, that there was an actual human trafficking operation running in Sheffield, cataloging people like merchandise, was too horrific to contemplate. I should have closed the browser immediately. I should have reported what I'd found, though to whom and with what evidence, I wasn't sure. Instead, I found myself scrolling through the listings again, this time with a growing sense of dread. Some of the entries included additional notes: suitable for domestic use, experienced in service industry, no visible markings. The clinical language made it all the more disturbing, like browsing a catalogue of appliances, not human lives. At the bottom of the page was a section labelled Local Available Inventory. What caught my eye, what made my blood run cold, was the postcode listed at the top of this section. S10, my postcode, the area where I lived. The listings under this heading were more detailed, including approximate locations. 500 metres from Encliffe Park, Broomhill area, near primary school, Crooks, terrace property with red door. I knew these places. I walked past them nearly every day. The primary school was 2 streets over from my flat. Encliffe Park was where I went running on weekends. These weren't abstract locations in a distant city. This was my neighbourhood, the streets I travelled daily. And according to this site, there were people being held there, listed for sale like furniture. I sat there for a long time. The only sound in the room, my own shallow breathing and the hum of my computer. The wind outside had died down, leaving an eerie silence. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing while simultaneously looking for any indication that it wasn't real. Maybe it was all an elaborate hoax. Maybe I'd stumbled upon some kind of alternate reality game with a disturbing premise. Maybe. But deep down, I knew. The specificity of the locations, the matter-of-fact descriptions, the total lack of dramatic flair that you'd expect from fiction. It all pointed to something genuine. And then I noticed something that removed any remaining doubt. At the very bottom of the page was a recently sold section with about a dozen entries marked as transaction completed. One of them included a reference to a news story I'd seen just the week before. A university student who had disappeared while walking home from a club. The entry simply read, SHF 1103 21, blonde, petite, sold, domestic, UAE. I felt physically sick. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely use the mouse. I needed to report this to the police, to someone who could actually do something. But as I reached for my phone, a notification appeared in the corner of my browser. A message from the site administrator. Unusual browsing pattern detected. Local viewer identified. Sheffield, S10 area, Western Bank. Verification in progress. My address. They had my actual address. I slammed my laptop shut and yanked the power cord from the wall, as if physically disconnecting could somehow undo what had just happened. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of how they could have identified me despite all my precautions. Had my VPN failed? Had I made some basic security mistake? It didn't matter how. What mattered was that whoever ran this site now knew exactly where I was. I spent that night at a hotel on the other side of the city, too terrified to stay in my own flat. I paid in cash, used a fake name at check-in, and spent hours staring at the ceiling, jumping at every sound in the corridor outside. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went to the police station. I told them I'd found what I believed to be a human trafficking operation online, but I was vague about how I'd come across it. I didn't mention the dark web or the message I'd received. Even in my panicked state, I was aware of how it might sound, how easily I could become a suspect rather than a reporter. The officer took my statement with what seemed like appropriate concern, but I could tell by his expression that he wasn't entirely convinced. Without specific details about victims or perpetrators, without any concrete evidence beyond my word, there wasn't much they could do. He promised they would look into it and took my contact information. But as I left the station, I had the sinking feeling that nothing would come of it. I stayed with a friend for the next week, making excuses about my heating being broken. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the real reason. It sounded too far-fetched, too dramatic. When I finally returned to my flat, I spent the first night sleeping with a kitchen knife beside my bed, starting awake at every creak and groan of the old building. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing happened. No suspicious characters appeared at my door. No strange cars parked outside my building. I began to think that perhaps the verification message had been an automated response, a scare tactic to frighten away anyone who stumbled across the site. Or maybe they had so many more important concerns that one random IT worker wasn't worth their time. I began to relax, gradually returning to my normal routines, though I never again ventured onto the dark web. Then, about a month later, I noticed something. There was a new listing on the regular missing persons board at the supermarket. A young woman, early 20s, last seen leaving her flat in Broomhill. Her flat was on my street, 3 buildings down from mine. The poster had been put up by her parents, who had travelled from London after not hearing from her for several days. 2 days after that, another missing person, this time a young man, a student at the university, last seen at a pub less than half a mile from my flat. By the third disappearance a week later, another woman, this one from the building directly opposite mine. I knew it wasn't coincidence. They were sending me a message. They were showing me that they could take people right from my doorstep, and no one could stop them. And they were letting me know that they hadn't forgotten about me. I moved the following week, breaking my lease and forfeiting my deposit. I found a flat in Manchester, changed my job, my phone number, even deleted all my social media accounts. For months, I looked over my shoulder constantly, convinced I was being followed. I saw significance in every coincidence, threat in every stranger's glance. It's been almost a year now. Some days I can almost convince myself that I overreacted, that the disappearances in my old neighborhood were just a terrible coincidence. But then I'll see a news report about human trafficking, or a missing person case with familiar details, and that cold dread returns. I've learned more than I ever wanted to about how these networks operate, how vast and well-connected they are, how they can reach into everyday life while remaining invisible to most people. Last week, I received a letter at my new address, an address that isn't listed anywhere, that I've shared only with my parents and my new employer. There was no return address, no message inside, just a printout of a classified listing, MCR-338229, IT professional, current location Northern Quarter, status pending acquisition. They found me, and now they're letting me know that I've moved from being a witness to being merchandise. I'm writing this from a hotel room near Piccadilly Station. I've bought a ticket to Glasgow for tomorrow, leaving at 5:43 a.m. From there, I don't know where I'll go. I don't know if there's anywhere I can go where they won't eventually find me. If you're reading this, stay away from the dark corners of the internet. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen. Some knowledge comes with a price you never stop paying. And if you ever see a classified listing that doesn't quite make sense, that uses clinical language to describe what sounds like people rather than products, close your browser immediately. Don't scroll. Don't investigate. Just walk away. I think there's someone in the hallway outside my room. They've been standing there for several minutes now. The door handle just moves slightly, as if someone's testing whether it's locked. I don't think I'm going to make that train tomorrow. The woman on the screen was still breathing when the countdown timer appeared. 30 minutes. That's how long she had left before whatever was going to happen to her began. I didn't know it then, but that's also when my normal life ended. I've never told anyone this story before. Not properly anyway. I've alluded to it when people ask why I switched universities in my second year, but I've never felt ready to relive it in full until now. I suppose sharing it here, anonymously, feels safer. My therapist suggested writing it down might help process what happened, but I couldn't bring myself to do that either. Somehow, telling it like this, as if I'm just recounting it to a friend who wasn't there, makes it more manageable. I was studying computer science at a university in northern England. Not one of the fancy Russell Group ones, but decent enough. The campus was this odd mix of brutalist 1960s concrete blocks and sleek glass buildings that had been added more recently. Our main computer lab was in one of these newer buildings, all gleaming surfaces and ergonomic chairs. The kind of place that's supposed to inspire innovation and creativity, but mostly just made me worry about leaving fingerprints on everything. It was mid-October, about 6 weeks into my first year. The excitement of my first weeks had worn off, and the reality of the workload was setting in. I remember it was raining that day, not the dramatic, thunderous kind, but that persistent, miserable drizzle that seems to seep into your bones. The type of weather that makes you want to stay indoors, which is exactly what I was doing. I had a 2-hour gap between lectures and decided to use the time to work on a programming assignment due the following week. The computer lab was busier than usual because of the weather, but I managed to find a spot near the back. I always preferred sitting there, fewer distractions, and I didn't have to worry about people looking over my shoulder at my screen. The computers in the lab were these high-spec machines that the university had recently invested in. They were set up so that students could log in with their university credentials, and everything would be saved to their personal drive on the university network. Personal USB drives weren't necessary, but many students still used them to transfer files between home and university. I was about halfway through my assignment when Professor Harris walked in. He taught our Introduction to Network Security module and was known for being somewhat eccentric but brilliant. He was in his 50s, with a perpetually rumpled appearance, the stereotype of an academic who cared more about ideas than presentation. Professor Harris was setting up for a lecture that would be held in the lab later that afternoon. He was connecting his laptop to the projector and muttering to himself. I didn't pay much attention. I was struggling with a particularly frustrating bit of code. But then I noticed him searching through his pockets and bag with increasing urgency. He'd clearly lost something. Eventually, he approached the teaching assistant who was supervising the lab and had a brief conversation I couldn't hear. The assistant shrugged and gestured around the room. Professor Harris looked annoyed but resigned. He left shortly after, presumably to retrieve whatever he'd forgotten from his office. I returned to my assignment, but a few minutes later, I noticed something under the desk where Professor Harris had been standing. A small black USB drive. Without thinking much of it, I picked it up, assuming it contained his lecture slides for the afternoon. I thought I'd be helpful and plug it into his laptop so it would be ready when he returned. This is the moment I replay in my head constantly. The moment where if I'd made a different choice, if I'd just left the USB drive at the reception desk or waited for Professor Harris to come back, everything that followed might not have happened. But I didn't. Instead, I walked over to his laptop, which was still connected to the projector but had gone into sleep mode. I wiggled the mouse to wake it up and plugged the USB drive into one of the ports. I expected a File Explorer window to open, showing the contents of the drive so I could find his lecture slides. Instead, the screen remained black for a moment. Then, without any prompt from me, an application launched automatically. At first, I thought it was some kind of video player as a dark window opened, filling the screen. I realized with horror that what I was looking at was being streamed in real time. The image was grainy and poorly lit, but clear enough to make out a room with bare concrete walls. It looked like a basement or cellar of some kind. In the center was a young woman, tied to a chair. Her head was slumped forward, but I could see she was breathing. She appeared unconscious, not dead, which was somehow both a relief and more terrifying, because it meant whatever was going to happen to her hadn't started yet. I froze. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Part of me thought, hoped, it might be some elaborate setup for a horror film or an extreme performance art piece. But deep down, I knew better. There was an authenticity to the crudeness of the setup that no staged production would include. The feed had no sound, which made it even more unnerving. I could see the woman's chest rising and falling with each breath, but the silence made it feel distant and surreal, like watching a security camera feed. A ticker at the bottom of the screen was counting down from 30 minutes. It was at 28:47 when I first noticed it. I should have immediately unplugged the USB drive and reported it. That would have been the sensible, ethical thing to do. But shock kept me rooted to the spot, staring at the screen. I couldn't reconcile what I was seeing with the ordinary university environment around me. The cognitive dissonance was paralyzing. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the background of the video, barely visible in the poor lighting, was a small table. On it was a copy of our university newspaper, folded open to show the front page. I recognized it immediately because I'd read it that morning. It was the current issue, published just 2 days earlier. This wasn't some old video file stored on the USB. This was happening now, somewhere close by, somewhere on or near our campus. Just as this realization hit me, the lab door opened and Professor Harris walked back in. Our eyes met, and for a split second, there was nothing unusual in his expression, just mild curiosity about why I was standing at his laptop. Then his gaze shifted to the projector screen, which was large enough that anyone in the room could see it clearly. His face changed, not with shock or horror, as mine must have been, but with something cold and calculating. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this was his USB drive, and he knew exactly what was on it. I looked around the lab, expecting others to be reacting to the disturbing image now projected for all to see. But most students were focused on their own screens, headphones on. Oblivious, the teaching assistant had stepped out. Only one other student, a girl sitting a few computers away, was staring at the projection with a confused expression. Professor Harris moved quickly. He reached the laptop in 3 long strides and ejected the USB drive. The screen went black immediately. He pocketed the drive and turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Curious about the dark web, are we?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "That's a dangerous habit. People who poke around where they shouldn't tend to find themselves in uncomfortable situations." I mumbled something about finding the drive on the floor and thinking it contained his lecture slides. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. He didn't believe me. I could tell by the way his eyes hardened, but he maintained that artificial smile. "Best forget what you saw," he said, still quietly. "It's not real anyway. Just a simulation for my advanced cybersecurity class. Special effects. Impressive, aren't they?" I nodded, desperate to escape the conversation and the lab. I returned to my computer, saved my work and logged off. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely navigate the mouse. As I packed up my things, I glanced at Professor Harris. He was watching me, that same cold calculation in his eyes. I left the lab as casually as I could manage. But once in the corridor, I nearly ran to the nearest toilet, where I was violently sick. My mind was racing with implications and possibilities, none of them good. If what I'd seen was real, and the university newspaper in the background strongly suggested it was, then Professor Harris was involved in something truly horrific, and he knew that I knew. I spent the next hour hiding in a cafe on campus, trying to decide what to do. Report it to the police? But what exactly would I say? That I'd seen a disturbing video that could have been faked? That a respected professor might be involved in something criminal based on a few seconds of footage and my interpretation of his reaction? It sounded ridiculous even to me. I decided to go back to my accommodation and think it through properly. I needed to gather my thoughts, maybe research if there had been any reports of missing women in the area. I convinced myself that approaching this methodically was better than rushing in with wild accusations. That was my second mistake. When I reached my room, the door was unlocked. I was certain I'd locked it that morning. I always did. Inside, nothing seemed obviously disturbed, but there was a sensation in the air, like the molecular structure of my personal space had been rearranged slightly. Someone had been there. On my bed was a university newspaper, the same edition I'd seen in the video. It was folded open to a specific page, one I hadn't paid attention to that morning. In the corner was a small advertisement for a student mental health service with the tagline, "Feeling watched, anxious, paranoid? We can help." It was a message, a warning. I packed a bag with essential items and left campus that evening. I stayed with a friend in Manchester for a week, claiming a family emergency. When I returned, I switched all my modules to avoid Professor Harris's classes. I considered reporting what I'd seen to the university authorities or the police. But each time I worked up the courage, I remembered that newspaper on my bed. He'd been in my room. He knew where I lived. And he clearly had connections to something much darker than academia. For the rest of that term, I felt eyes on me constantly. Sometimes I'd glimpse Professor Harris across the campus, watching me. Once, I found a USB drive identical to the one I'd found, sitting on my desk in the library. I left it untouched and moved to another floor. I never saw its owner collect it. I transferred to a different university for my second year, using family issues as an excuse. I haven't been back to that campus since. Sometimes I search local news archives for reports of missing women around that time, but I've never found anything conclusive. I don't know if what I saw that day was the prelude to a murder, or part of some elaborate underground streaming service catering to sadistic viewers. I don't know if the woman in the chair was rescued, or if she became another missing person statistic. I don't know how deep Professor Harris was involved, or how many others at the university might have been part of it. What I do know is that the dark web isn't just some abstract concept or urban legend. It's real, and it touches our ordinary world in ways we'd prefer not to acknowledge. The barrier between the two is thinner than most people realize, sometimes as thin as a small black USB drive left on a computer lab floor. I still use computers, obviously. I had to continue my degree, but I never use public computer labs anymore. I never plug in USB drives, I find. And I never, ever open files or applications I'm not 100% certain about. Some doors, once opened, can't be properly closed again. They leave a crack through which the darkness can always find its way back to you. I haven't told my girlfriend this, not my family nor the police, definitely not the police. So I'm 29. I work in IT consulting in Birmingham. There's nothing special about my life really. I've got a decent flat, been with my girlfriend for 3 years, and I hang out with the same group of friends I've known since uni. My job is mostly remote troubleshooting for corporate clients, which is basically me spending all day on video calls telling executives how to restart their computers or find files they've misplaced. My friend Mark and I go way back to our first year at uni, where we both did computer science. He was always the one taking risks. While I went into boring corporate IT, he got into cybersecurity and now does penetration testing for a living. Basically, companies pay him to hack into their systems to find weaknesses. We don't work in the same field anymore, but we still game online most weeks and grab a pint when we can. So this Friday night in March, we're doing our usual thing, playing some online games. My girlfriend was away at her sister's for the weekend. Around 10, after a few rounds, Mark says he wants to show me something he found during a job. Nothing unusual there. He's always sending me weird coding stuff or security things he discovers. We switched to screen sharing on our voice chat. His desktop was a mess as usual, about 50 windows open because he never closes anything. He dug through some folders, then got all serious, asking if I was ready to see something intense. I laughed it off, thinking he was being dramatic about some security hole he'd found or something. That was just Mark's way, always making tech discoveries sound like he'd found buried treasure. He opened up this weird browser I didn't recognize, not Chrome or anything normal, something with a bare-bones interface. When I asked about it, he said it was for accessing the dark web, all configured with security stuff and anonymizing features. That got my attention. I mean, I knew what the dark web was, that hidden part of the internet, where all the dodgy stuff happens, but I'd never had any reason to go there myself. Mark explained that during a job, he'd found some login credentials that led him into some pretty dark places online. He'd found what he called mind-blowing, some live streaming site that showed reality without filters. The way he described it, I thought maybe it was just some extreme version of reality TV or banned content too graphic for YouTube or something. Looking back, I should have noticed something was off. Mark's usually pretty chilled, but that night he had this weird energy, like nervous, but excited at the same time. Not like him at all. But I didn't think much of it then, just went along, because I was curious what had got him so worked up. He went through a bunch of login screens and eventually got to this site. Black background, red text, very basic looking. It was set up kind of like Netflix, with thumbnails for different channels. Most were dark or just showing shadows, but one was active with what looked like a brightly lit room. Mark clicked on it and it filled the screen. What I saw was what looked like a basement or warehouse. Concrete walls, super bright, harsh lighting. In the middle was a bloke tied to a chair, blindfolded. Standing next to him was someone in dark clothes, wearing one of those plain white masks you see in horror films. My first thought was, this is some low-budget horror film or haunted house live stream. It looks staged, you know? Too perfect, like a film set. I made some joke about how bad the production was, but Mark didn't laugh. Instead, he pointed to a chat window where people with weird usernames were posting comments and what looked like requests for things to happen. Mark then told me, dead serious, that this was called a red room, a live stream of actual torture or violence that people pay to watch and sometimes even control. I told him to shut it off, that it had to be fake, that nobody would be stupid enough to broadcast themselves committing actual crimes. He insisted it was real, that he'd checked with some security contacts, and that this stream was apparently one of the trusted ones in these circles. The fact he used the word trusted for something like this made me feel sick. I was about to disconnect when the person in the mask walked over to the guy in the chair and took off his blindfold. The bloke blinked in the bright light, looking around, and when I saw his face clearly, I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. I knew him. Not well, he wasn't a mate or family or anything, but definitely someone from my everyday life. He was the barista at the coffee shop near my office. I stopped there almost every morning. We weren't friends exactly, but we had that familiar thing you get with someone you see regularly. He always remembered my order, sometimes recommended new coffees. We'd chat about the weather or whatever. He'd mentioned once that he was working to save up for uni, and now here he was, tied up in what Mark was saying was a red room. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost on our video call, because Mark asked if I was okay. Without thinking, I blurted out that I knew the guy on screen. Mark laughed at first, thinking I was joking. When I insisted, telling him exactly who it was and how I knew him, Mark's face went completely white. He suddenly seemed to realize what this meant. Either this was some crazy coincidence, or somehow the people running this stream were in the same city as me. Then things got really freaky. The chat on the stream suddenly went crazy. People started posting messages asking if someone had recognized the subject, if there had been a security breach. I realized with absolute horror that our conversation was somehow being monitored. Either Mark's computer was compromised, or the streaming site had access to our voice chat. Mark started frantically trying to close the browser, but it froze up. Messages kept appearing in the chat, now directly addressing the viewer who knows the subject. One user with an admin tag posted coordinates that were scarily close to my neighborhood. Mark ended the screen share and hung up on our call. I tried calling straight back, but he didn't answer. A few minutes later, I got a text from him telling me to turn off all my devices, not to contact him again, and to stay somewhere else that night. He said his system had been compromised, and whoever was running the stream now had info on both of us. I stayed at a hotel that night, paid cash, kept checking the news for anything about kidnappings or murders. Next morning, I went to the coffee shop, heart pounding the whole time. The barista was there, completely normal, serving customers like nothing had happened. He greeted me like usual, same as any other day. For a minute, I felt this massive relief. Maybe it was all fake, a prank, a lookalike, something like that. I actually managed to convince myself of this until I got back to my flat that afternoon and found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside was a photo, a screenshot from our video call, showing my face exactly at the moment when I recognized the barista. On the back, written in red ink, "Viewers become participants eventually." I haven't heard from Mark since. His social media disappeared a few days later. Our mutual friends told me he suddenly quit his job and moved abroad. The barista worked at the coffee shop for about another week, then just vanished. According to his co-workers, he didn't give notice or anything, just stopped showing up. I've moved flats, changed my phone number, set up new online accounts, got security cameras, take different routes to work every day, but I never feel safe. Every night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I keep seeing that moment when I recognized him, and I can't stop thinking about how these people know exactly who I am and where to find me. The worst part is not knowing. Was this whole thing set up? Did they deliberately pick someone from my daily life, knowing I'd be watching? Or was it just some horrible coincidence that of all the people they could have grabbed, they took someone I would recognize? I honestly don't know which is worse, that I randomly stumbled across this nightmare, or that I was the target all along. It's been 3 months since that night on my couch, and I still haven't used my laptop properly since. I've bought a new one actually. I just couldn't bring myself to even turn the old one on again. Some things you just can't unsee, and what I found in my own bookmarks folder still gives me nightmares. I've always been a bit of a tech hoarder. I'm the type who never deletes emails, keeps screenshots of everything, and has about 50 tabs open at once. My friends always joke about it, how I'll save articles I'll never read and bookmark pages just in case, but never actually go back to them. It's not like I'm disorganized exactly, just reluctant to get rid of things. My digital life is a bit like my flat in that way, cluttered but with a system that makes sense to me. I work in IT support for a small company in Sheffield. Not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays the bills, and I genuinely enjoy solving technical problems. I'd been with the company for about 4 years at this point, and part of my job involved testing different browsers and tools to make recommendations for our staff. That's my excuse for why I had so many random programs installed on my laptop anyway. That Friday night in January, I was just lounging on my couch with a beer, scrolling through Netflix, but not really finding anything worth watching. It was freezing outside, one of those damp, cold Yorkshire nights where the chill seems to seep through the walls. I'd pulled my favorite blanket over me and had the heating cranked up, just feeling a bit bored and restless. I decided to finally sort through my digital clutter, something I'd been putting off for ages. It felt like a productive way to waste time, if that makes sense. I started with my email, 16,000 unread messages, got overwhelmed immediately, and switched to something easier, my browser bookmarks. I use Chrome as my main browser, but I also had Firefox, Edge, and a few others installed for work purposes. I decided to go through them all, starting with the ones I rarely used. When I opened Firefox, I was surprised to see how many bookmarks I had in there. I barely even use this browser except occasionally for testing things. The bookmark folders were pretty standard at first: work resources, recipes I'll never make, holiday research from a trip I'd planned 2 years ago. But then I noticed one simply labeled utility tools. I didn't remember creating it, but that wasn't unusual. I'm always saving random software tools and then forgetting about them. When I clicked on the folder, there were only about 5 bookmarks inside. Most were what you'd expect: a password manager, a file conversion tool, some kind of coding resource. But the last one caught my eye because it didn't have a proper name, just a string of random characters followed by .onion. I'm tech savvy enough to recognize an onion address when I see one. It's a dark web address, the kind you need the Tor browser to access. But I didn't remember ever saving anything from the dark web. I'd heard about it, of course, and was curious about it, like most people in my field, but I'd never actually gone through the effort of exploring it myself. What was strange was that Firefox shouldn't even be able to open onion addresses without being configured specially. I figured maybe I'd set it up years ago and forgotten about it, or maybe the bookmark was just copied from somewhere as a reference. Out of curiosity, I clicked it, fully expecting to get an error message. Instead, a loading screen appeared. My heart did this weird little jump in my chest. Firefox shouldn't be able to do this. It shouldn't be connecting to an onion address. I'd never installed Tor or configured any special proxies on this browser. At least, I didn't think I had. Before I could process what was happening, the page loaded. It was a simple black background with what looked like a video player in the center. No text, no navigation, nothing else on the page. Just a video player showing what appeared to be a still image of an empty room, some kind of basement or storage area with concrete walls. There was a timestamp in the corner showing the current date and time. I remember sitting up straighter, the blanket falling off my shoulders, suddenly very alert. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe it wasn't actually a dark website, just something designed to look mysterious. I moved my cursor to close the window, but then the image on screen shifted slightly. It wasn't a still image, it was a video feed, and someone had just walked into frame. The figure was mostly in shadow, but I could make out a person moving around what looked like a workbench against one wall. They seemed to be arranging items, though I couldn't clearly see what they were. Something about the deliberate, methodical movements made the hairs on my arms stand up. This didn't feel like some random webcam feed or art project. There was purpose in those movements. I should have closed the browser immediately. Any sensible person would have. But there's this moment of paralysis that comes with seeing something so unexpected. Your brain needs to catch up, to make sense of what you're witnessing before you can react. The figure turned slightly, and light from somewhere off camera illuminated their face. or what should have been their face. They were wearing a plain white mask with just eye holes cut out. The kind of thing you might find in a craft shop, meant for decoration. The contrast of that blank white face against the shadowy room made my stomach clench. As they turned further, I could finally see what they had been arranging on the workbench. Tools, knives, pliers, what looked like surgical equipment, all laid out with careful precision. Next to them was something that looked disturbingly like restraints. That's when the reality of what I might be watching hit me. This wasn't just some weird art project or practical joke. This looked like preparation for something terrible. And somehow, inexplicably, I had a bookmark to it in my browser. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I got up and paced around my flat, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. How could I have a bookmark to something like that? I never visit the dark web. And how was Firefox even able to access an Onion address? After about 20 minutes of panic, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had used my laptop at some point, but I rarely let anyone borrow it. Could it have been a virus or some kind of malware that added the bookmark? But why would malware direct me to what looked like a live stream? I needed to check if what I saw was real. I opened my laptop again, but this time I didn't click the bookmark. Instead, I looked at its properties. The bookmark had been created 8 months earlier, according to the metadata. 8 months. I tried to remember what was happening in my life then, who might have had access to my computer. Then I remembered. About 8 months ago, my laptop had been stolen from my car. I'd reported it to the police, but miraculously, it had been recovered a week later. Found in a skip behind a shopping center across town. Nothing seemed to be missing or damaged, and I'd run antivirus scans that came up clean. I'd assumed the thief had just taken it, realized it was password protected, and dumped it. But what if they had installed something on it first? What if they had configured Firefox to access the dark web and left that bookmark deliberately? The thought made me feel physically ill. I'd been using this laptop for 8 months without realizing someone had tampered with it. What else might they have installed? Were they monitoring me? Had I been an unknowing participant in whatever disturbing thing I just witnessed? I couldn't bring myself to check the bookmark again. Instead, I shut down my laptop completely, unplugged it, and shoved it under my couch, as if putting it out of sight would somehow make what I'd seen less real. The next day, I took the laptop to a friend who works in cybersecurity. I didn't tell him exactly what I'd seen, just that I'd found strange bookmarks I didn't recognize and suspected my laptop had been compromised when it was stolen. He offered to wipe it completely and reinstall the operating system, which I gratefully accepted. When he was examining it before the wipe, he found something that chilled me to the bone. There was indeed a hidden configuration that allowed Firefox to connect to the Tor network. But more disturbing was a small program running in the background that seemed to be taking periodic screenshots and accessing my webcam. The timestamp showed it had been active since shortly after my laptop had been recovered. For 8 months, someone might have been watching me through my own laptop. Someone who was connected to whatever horrible thing I had glimpsed on that live stream. I've since bought a new laptop and taken every security precaution imaginable. I cover my webcam, use a VPN, and regularly check for any unusual software or connections. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched somehow. What keeps me up at night isn't just what I saw, or even the knowledge that someone had access to my computer for months. It's the question of why. Why put that bookmark there? Was it a mistake? Or was it deliberate? A way to show me they could access my personal space anytime they wanted. Were they trying to recruit me into whatever disturbing activity they were preparing for? Or was I somehow meant to be a future participant in a much more terrifying way? I'll never know for sure. And maybe that's the most disturbing part of all. That bookmark wasn't just a random link. It was a window into something dark that had been hiding in my own digital space for months, silently watching and waiting. There's something uniquely terrifying about waking up to find you're not alone. Not in the traditional sense of someone physically being in your room, but in that modern digital way where your devices have betrayed you. That moment when you realize the technology you trusted has become a window for someone else to peer through. It happened to me 3 months ago, and I haven't had a proper night's sleep since. I should probably give you a bit of background. I work as a network administrator for a small tech company in Bristol. Nothing glamorous, just your typical IT job. Troubleshooting connections, maintaining servers, the usual stuff. I've always been interested in cybersecurity as a hobby, which is probably what got me into this mess in the first place. Curiosity and technical knowledge can be a dangerous combination. After a particularly rough breakup last year, I developed this bad habit of browsing the internet until the early hours, often falling asleep with my laptop still running beside me on the bed. My flat is a small one-bedroom place in one of those converted Victorian houses. High ceilings, drafty windows, and neighbours I rarely see. Perfect for someone who values privacy, but terrible for someone developing paranoia, as it turns out. I'd been exploring the dark web for about 6 months prior to the incident. Not for anything illegal, mind you. Just fascinated by the technology, the anonymity of it all. And yes, I'll admit, the thrill of accessing something most people don't understand. I'd visit forums discussing privacy tools, cryptocurrency exchanges, that sort of thing. Occasionally, I'd venture into some of the marketplaces out of curiosity, but I never bought anything. I considered myself a cautious observer, smart enough to protect myself. Looking back, that confidence was my first mistake. The night it happened was a Wednesday in February, one of those bitter cold nights where the wind finds every gap in your window frames. I remember it had been a frustrating day at work, a server migration gone wrong, hours of overtime, the kind of day that leaves you mentally drained. I'd come home around 9, heated up some leftover pasta, and crawled into bed with my laptop to unwind. I was browsing through some dark web forums, reading about new encryption methods, when I started to drift off. You know that feeling when you're reading and suddenly realize the words aren't making sense anymore because you're half asleep? That's where I was, in that hazy state between consciousness and dreams. I remember my fingers slipping on the trackpad, clicking something I hadn't meant to click, but I was too tired to care. I closed my eyes, telling myself I'd shut down the laptop properly in a minute. The next thing I knew, I was waking up with a start. It was that sudden, jarring kind of awakening where something pulls you from deep sleep, but you're not sure what. My bedroom was dark, except for the blue glow of my laptop screen. The digital clock on my bedside table read 3:17 a.m. At first, I thought it was just the cold that had woken me. My duvet had slipped off and the room was freezing. But then I noticed my laptop screen. It wasn't displaying the forum I'd been browsing. Instead, there was a video feed open, taking up the entire screen. A dark room, lit only by what looked like a computer monitor, and sitting in front of it was a figure in a black hoodie, their face hidden in shadow. They weren't moving, just sitting there, staring directly at the camera. At me. My first sleepy thought was that I'd accidentally clicked on some kind of live stream before falling asleep. But as my brain cleared, I realized this wasn't YouTube or Twitch. There was no interface, no view account, no chat window, just this feed taking up my entire screen with no browser window around it. I reached for the trackpad, thinking I'd close whatever this was, but the cursor didn't appear. I tried keyboard shortcuts. Nothing. The feed just continued, the hooded figure sitting motionless. Then, slowly, they raised a hand and gave a small wave. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't some random stream I'd clicked on. This person was watching me, responding to me. I slammed the laptop shut and sat up in bed, fully awake now, heart pounding in my chest. I told myself it was just some weird glitch or maybe malware I'd picked up browsing those forums. Perhaps someone had gained remote access to my webcam. Creepy, yes, but explicable. Nothing to panic about. I could run some security scans in the morning, reinstall my OS if necessary. I even convinced myself that I might have dreamt it, that weird space between sleeping and waking where reality gets distorted. After about 20 minutes of sitting in the dark, listening to my own breathing, I managed to calm down enough to consider going back to sleep. I moved my closed laptop from the bed to my desk, unplugged it for good measure, and crawled back under the covers. Just as I was drifting off again, my phone screen lit up on the bedside table. A notification, a new email. I should have ignored it until morning, but some combination of lingering unease and IT worker instinct made me check. The email had no subject. The sender address was just a string of random numbers and letters. The body contained only a link. Against every ounce of common sense, my thumb tapped it. My phone browser opened to a video feed, the same feed that had been on my laptop. But now the angle was different. The hooded figure was still there, but the camera showed more of the room. Behind them was a wall covered in monitors, each displaying different rooms of what looked like a house. With a sickening lurch, I recognized one of them. My bedroom. Me, sitting up in bed, phone in hand, face lit by the blue glow of the screen. I threw my phone across the room in panic. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor, the screen going dark. For several minutes, I just sat there frozen, trying to process what I'd seen. Someone had access to cameras in my flat, cameras I hadn't installed. They were watching me, had been watching me for who knows how long. Sleep was out of the question now. I got up, turned on every light in the flat, and began searching for cameras. I checked smoke detectors, light fixtures, air vents, all the usual hiding spots. Nothing. I unplugged my router, turned off my phone, disconnected every smart device I owned. Then I sat on my sofa, waiting for dawn, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. The next day, I called in sick to work and took my laptop to a friend who specializes in cybersecurity. I explained that I thought someone might have hacked into my system. I didn't tell him about the video feed or my suspicions about hidden cameras. It sounded too paranoid, too crazy. He ran some diagnostics and found traces of a remote access Trojan, a type of malware that allows someone to control your computer from a distance. According to him, it had been installed about 3 months earlier, around the time I first started browsing the dark web. He removed the malware, helped me secure my laptop, and recommended I change all my passwords and enable two-factor authentication on everything. I did all that and more. Factory reset my phone, bought a new router, even put tape over all my device cameras. For a few days, I felt safer. Then I received a text from an unknown number. New cameras hidden better. Keep waving. I immediately moved out of my flat, staying with a friend while I found a new place. I changed my phone number, created new email accounts, even considered changing jobs. I was thorough, careful, paranoid, and for a while, I thought I'd escaped. Then last week, As I was setting up my computer in my new place, I found a file on my desktop that I hadn't put there. A video file. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I did. It showed footage of me from the previous day, moving into my new flat. The camera angle was from across the street, through my new living room window. At the end, text appeared on screen. The dark web sees everything. Privacy is an illusion. I've since learned that there are forums on the dark web dedicated to this. People who hack into others' devices and watch them, trading access like baseball cards. Some do it for the thrill of invasion, others for more sinister purposes. They call it live streaming, turning unsuspecting people's lives into entertainment. I don't know why I was targeted. Maybe I visited the wrong forum, clicked the wrong link, or maybe it was completely random. What I do know is that someone is still watching me, still one step ahead despite everything I've done to shake them. I've considered going to the police, but what would I tell them? That someone I can't identify, who I unwittingly encountered on the dark web, has been spying on me through my devices, that they somehow keep finding me despite all my precautions. They think I was paranoid, delusional, so I live with it. I cover my webcam, disconnect my devices when not using them, keep my curtains drawn. I scan my place for cameras weekly. I've become obsessed with privacy settings, VPNs, encryption. But in my darkest moments, I wonder if any of it matters. If they found me once, they can find me again. The most terrifying part isn't the invasion of privacy. It's the helplessness. In our connected world, true privacy might be impossible. We surround ourselves with devices that watch and listen, that track our movements and habits. Most of the time, it's for convenience or security. But sometimes, someone decides to use that technology against you. And when they do, you realize how vulnerable you've been all along. Every night before bed, I shut down all my devices completely. And every morning, I check to make sure they haven't turned themselves on while I slept, because I know that somewhere in the darkness of the web, a hooded figure might be watching, waiting for me to let my guard down again. I used to think most people who vanished without a trace had a reason to, like they were running from something or into something. You tell yourself it makes sense because otherwise it's too disturbing to sit with, too unexplainable. My mum used to watch those true crime shows when I was growing up, the ones with the dramatic reenactments and the stoic narrators. I'd catch glimpses of them while passing through the living room. And even then, I could sense the pattern. The runaway spouse, the person with gambling debts, the one who wanted to start over. There was always a narrative thread to follow, something that let you say, that's why. But Josh didn't fit any of those ideas. And the more I think about it, the less I understand what really happened. I didn't know Josh that well. Not personally anyway. He was more of a friend of a friend situation. Someone who showed up to parties, usually sat on the edge of the room with his back to the wall, always nursing a drink longer than anyone else. Quiet guy. Not weird, just faded into the background. You'd talk to him for 10 minutes, walk away, and forget half of what was said. I remember once at a birthday thing for a mutual friend, I ended up next to him at the makeshift bar. Really just a kitchen counter with bottles lined up. He asked what I was drinking, and I said something about wanting something that wouldn't leave me with a hangover. He smiled, not a big smile, just a slight upturn of the lips, and mixed me something with soda water and lime that tasted better than it had any right to. Electrolytes, he said, like it explained everything. That was Josh, helpful in this quiet, unassuming way that you didn't fully register until later. But he was close with Liam, and Liam was my housemate for 2 years. That's how Josh ended up around us sometimes. Late night hangs, IFA tournaments, beer on the kitchen counter while we argued about whether Die Hard counts as a Christmas movie. Stuff like that. Harmless. One night stands out in my memory. It was raining. One of those sudden summer downpours that feels like the sky just cracked open. We'd lost power, so we were sitting around by candlelight, a little drunk, a little bored. Josh started talking about encryption, about how most people don't realize how fragile their digital privacy is. It was the most animated I'd ever seen him. His eyes caught the candlelight, and for a moment, he seemed more present than usual, more substantial. Then Liam made some joke about tinfoil hats, and Josh retreated back into himself, laughing it off. But I remember thinking there was something genuine in that moment, something that mattered to him. He didn't really talk about himself much. Most of what I knew came secondhand through Liam. Apparently Josh had done a bit of coding work, freelance gigs, that kind of thing. Always had some side hustle going. The kind of guy who could rebuild your router or jailbreak a phone with one hand while eating cereal with the other. I didn't think much of it until he disappeared. I still remember the night Liam told me. We were sitting on the couch half watching a movie. Something dumb and loud with explosions that neither of us was really following. I was scrolling through my phone, probably on Instagram or whatever, looking at pictures of people I barely knew living lives that seemed impossibly put together. The kind of mindless scrolling that fills time but not much else. Then Liam's phone buzzed. He looked down, frowned, and just kind of froze. The way people do when the message isn't long, but it's heavy. It's funny how you just know, isn't it? How the air in a room can change based on the look on someone's face. I asked what was up, and he said Josh had gone missing. Like, actually missing. No one had heard from him in 4 days. Didn't show up for work, didn't answer texts. His flatmate said his room looked like he left in the middle of something. Half a bowl of cereal on the desk. And I know this sounds stupid, but the cereal part got to me. I couldn't stop picturing it. Milk going warm. Soggy loops stuck to the sides of the bowl. It just felt human. Like a timestamp. Like those plaster casts they make of Pompeii victims, frozen in the middle of ordinary life. I kept thinking about how we all leave these small accidental monuments to our routines. The coffee mug left on the counter, the book splayed open on the couch. The difference is, most of us come back to them. I asked if he thought it was serious. Liam said he didn't know. He looked worried though, in that way where someone's trying not to sound dramatic, but it's already past that point. We both kept watching the movie, but I don't think either of us could tell you what happened in it after that point. It was just noise and light while our minds were elsewhere. That was 3 years ago. Josh was never found. I'm not telling you this because I think I know what happened to him. I'm telling you this because of what Liam told me, 6 months after the fact, and because I still think about it, more than I probably should. It's like a splinter under your skin that you can't see, but you keep pressing anyway. One of those thoughts that surfaces at 3 a.m. when you're trying to sleep, or when you're standing in line at the grocery store, or driving home on autopilot. It started apparently with a link. Josh had been on the dark web, not uncommon for him, according to Liam. He was into encryption stuff, played with Linux builds, one of those guys who liked testing boundaries for the sake of it. Not in a dangerous way. Just Curiosity that didn't have an off switch. I remember thinking that seemed right. There was always something about Josh that gave the impression of someone who wanted to know how things worked from the inside out. I once saw him take apart a broken coffee maker in our kitchen, spread the pieces across the table like he was performing some kind of mechanical autopsy. He fixed it too, said it was just a loose connection. When I asked how he knew what to look for, he just shrugged and said, "Things usually break in the simplest way possible." I think about that line sometimes, wonder if it applies to people too. But this time, he found something that rattled him. Liam said Josh came over one night and brought it up like it was no big deal. Just mentioned he'd stumbled into some live feeds that didn't seem staged. No usernames, no chat, just video. At first, Liam thought he meant pirated security camera streams. That kind of thing had been floating around for years. But Josh said it was different, that the page he found wasn't public, that he only got there through a string of relays he couldn't retrace. He said it had a name, something like room service or guest room live, and when it loaded, the screen was black except for a red countdown timer. Liam said he asked what happened when it hit 0. Josh just stared at him for a second, then said, "Nothing I ever want to see again." That was it. He didn't go into detail, didn't describe what he saw, but something about the way he said it stuck with Liam. And honestly, the fact he didn't say anything, that's worse, isn't it? You can't put it in a box. Your imagination does all the work. I've done it myself, lying awake at night, trying to fill in that blank space with something that would make sense of what came after. But every scenario I come up with feels both too extreme and not extreme enough to explain someone just vanishing. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle where you're not sure if you have all the pieces or even what the final picture is supposed to look like. The part that gets me, the part that keeps replaying in my head, is what happened next. Liam said Josh started acting off, not paranoid exactly, but distracted, edgy, like he was running low on sleep. He'd message at odd hours, ask strange questions. Would you tell someone if you saw something online that might have been real? Stuff like that. Not accusations, just thought experiments. Except you could tell they weren't hypothetical. I've been there before. Not with anything like this, but with that feeling of carrying something heavy that you can't quite name. That restless energy that comes from knowing something's wrong, but not being able to articulate it. It makes you feel like you're vibrating at a different frequency than everyone around you, like you're watching the world through glass. Then, about a week later, Josh told Liam he thought he was being followed. He didn't sound scared, just annoyed, like it was inconvenient. Said he kept seeing the same guy on his street, same coat, same build. Thought maybe it was coincidence at first, but then the guy showed up across the road from his flat 2 days in a row. Just standing there, smoking. Didn't move, didn't look at him, but he knew. That detail always strikes me as so human. Not terror, not panic, but annoyance. Like finding out your card's been skimmed or your identity stolen. That particular brand of victimhood that feels both personal and bureaucratic at the same time. I wonder if Josh knew, on some level, what was coming. If the annoyance was just a way of processing something much larger and more frightening. Liam asked if he called the police. Josh laughed. Said there wasn't anything to report. Just a guy on a public street. No threat. And besides, what would he say? That he watched something he shouldn't have. And now, he had a shadow. That was the last time they spoke in person. A couple of days later, Josh stopped replying to messages. Calls went straight to voicemail. Then his flatmate reported him missing. When the police got involved, they didn't find much. No signs of forced entry, no credit card activity. Phone last pinged near his apartment. Laptop was gone. So was his external drive. I remember the days right after, how surreal everything felt. We'd be doing normal things, making dinner, watching TV. But there was this heaviness in the air, this awareness that somewhere, not far from us, something had gone very wrong. It's strange how someone's absence can be more present than they ever were. And here's the part Liam didn't tell anyone else. The part he told me when he was drunk one night after we'd both had too much. We were sitting on our tiny balcony, passing a bottle back and forth, watching the street below get quieter as the night deepened. The kind of night where secrets feel like currency, where the darkness makes it easier to say things out loud. He said Josh left something behind. Not a note, not a message, a USB drive. It was taped under his desk. His flatmate found it while cleaning up, didn't know what it was, and gave it to Liam. Liam waited a week before opening it. He said he almost didn't, said he was scared of what might be on it. But curiosity got the better of him. He plugged it into an old laptop with no internet connection. There was only one file, a text document, no title. Inside were coordinates. That's it. And underneath them, do not watch. I remember asking him, did you look them up? I was picturing one of those crime show moments where the hero types the coordinates into Google Maps and there's a dramatic zoom, something meaningful revealed. Reality is never that clean though, is it? He said yes. Of course he did. It was in the middle of nowhere, rural land, up north, near a disused industrial park. Nothing there. No houses, no traffic cams, no reason for it to be marked. I wondered aloud if he'd considered going there. He looked at me like I'd suggested setting ourselves on fire. Would you? He asked. And I had to admit, I wouldn't. Not alone anyway. Maybe not even with company. There are some doors you don't want to open, some questions better left unanswered, but that doesn't stop them from haunting you. And that was where Liam stopped. He said he didn't want to know more, didn't want to dig. He formatted the USB drive and threw it out, said he was done. But I could tell it still ate at him. He would bring up Josh in strange moments, like when we'd be walking home late at night and pass someone standing too still under a street lamp, or when the internet would lag just a little too long. He'd glance at me and say something like, I wonder if it started like this. I catch myself doing the same thing sometimes, noticing patterns that probably aren't there, getting that prickle on the back of my neck when I see someone take a photo of me in the background at a bar, wondering if my webcam light is really off when my laptop says it is. It's the kind of paranoia that feels both irrational and completely justified, depending on what time of day you're thinking about it. There was something else though, something that happened after that, something Liam told me months later when we had both moved on, sort of. We'd stopped talking about it as much. Life had settled back into its routine, work, socializing, the ordinary cycle of days. But some wounds don't heal, they just stop bleeding. He got a package, small, no return address. Inside was a phone, prepaid, burned, no SIM, just a photo on the screen. It was a screenshot of a paused video, grainy, low light, but clear enough. Josh, tied to a chair, eyes wide, gagged. The timestamp on the video was the same night he vanished. That was all it showed. Nothing before, nothing after. Liam didn't tell the police, said they wouldn't believe him. And maybe he was right. What would they do with a burner phone and a screenshot that could have been faked? without a body or concrete evidence. It was just another strange piece in a puzzle that didn't seem to have edges. But I believe him, because I saw the picture. He showed me, once, before he smashed the phone and threw it in the canal. I remember that night vividly. We stood on the bridge, watched the phone break the surface of the water and then sink, leaving barely a ripple. It was a cold night, our breaths fogging in front of us. Neither of us spoke on the way home. What was there to say? We just disposed of what might be the last known image of our friend. Evidence of something neither of us wanted to name. And the worst part wasn't seeing Josh like that. It was knowing he was looking straight at the camera, like he knew someone was watching. And maybe, deep down, he hoped it would be someone who cared. He was never seen again. Sometimes I wonder if that was the whole point. Not just the stream, the process of someone watching it, someone knowing about it and carrying it, like a kind of witness, whether you want to be or not. I've thought about this a lot, about the weight of being a witness to something you can't fully understand or explain, about the responsibility of carrying someone else's story when they can't tell it themselves. It changes you in ways both subtle and profound, makes you see the world differently, makes you question things you used to take for granted. Liam stopped talking about it eventually, but I don't think he forgot. I know I haven't. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself searching for those coordinates again. I never save them, never write them down, but I keep looking, keep zooming in on that patch of nowhere land, as if the satellite image might show something new, as if the truth might suddenly come into focus if I just look hard enough. It never does, but I keep looking anyway. I think I always will.